What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So recently I did a poll on all of the social media platforms to try and figure out some topics to do this year for, just anything that people wanted to learn, right? So one of the things that came up most commonly throughout was matching a rod with a specific technique. So a lot of people talk about reels, line, all of that stuff when they're talking about fishing, technique specific stuff. Not a lot of talk about the rods. So a couple things to start off with. I'm not going to go brand specific. Use whatever you want. I partnered with Favorite this year because I think that what they offer, value, price, quality, I'm not sure that they can be beat. For the average angler that's, cost conscious, I don't know that you can beat a Favorite, but you may be able to. So in the end, use whatever it is that you guys use that you're most comfortable with as far as a brand or a manufacturer, right? So we're not going to talk too much about that. But what I do want to spend some time on is, the weights of the rod, the actions, and lengths. And I think this will help guide maybe some of you the right direction. Now, I'm not saying that everything that I have here is gospel. Use it as you would use anything, right? Pick the parts out of it that you think are pertinent to your style, your preference, whatever it is, and you can throw the rest out. I'm not saying that everything in here is 100% accurate. I'm saying the stuff that I wrote down, and I took some notes just so I didn't miss anything, are the things that give me the best luck, the most confidence, and overall, I think they give me the best action on whatever technique or lure I'm using, right? So let's start off talking about chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, and that style of a piece of tackle, right? So you can apply this to whatever if it's in that same class. But when you think about chatterbaits and spinnerbaits, I use two different types of rods for that. So I'm also not going to get into parabolic bend and all of that garbage. Excuse me. I think we can sometimes overcomplicate it a lot by doing that, and I think it's a waste of time. So again, I'm going to tell you the action, the weight, and the length of rods that I like to use for a specific lure. So when we think about spinnerbaits and chatterbaits, I use two basic rods. So I use a medium heavy fast, and then I'll use a medium heavy extra fast. So when you break it down into why, I like the medium heavy fast for things that are a 1/2 ounce and under. I like the extra fast, anything over a 1/2 ounce. I just think that, from a castability standpoint, sensitivity, like all that stuff, those two rods for me have worked out the best. As far as length goes, 6'6", all the way up as long as you want to go. It doesn't matter. I don't care. If you're comfortable throwing an 8-foot rod and you can where you live in a tournament scenario, which I don't know that there are many that can go over 8 feet, but then use whatever length you want. But I use the shorter rod, 6'6", 6'8", 6'10", really close, right? When I'm trying to pitch some of these spinnerbaits into heavy cover, close quarters under tree branches, docks, stuff like that, I might go a little bit shorter. Most of the time I'm throwing a 7-foot to a 7'2". I just think that's a great overall length of a rod for your average angler, right? So you can also use that for things like the extra fast for like football jigs, medium-sized swim baits, Carolina rigs. Works really good for all of those. So that's kind of it for me from a chatterbait, spinnerbait standpoint. So let's move over to crankbaits. So crankbaits are one of my favorite ways to fish between crankbaits and jerkbaits. I just love it. Power fishing at its finest. It's just, for me, a fantastic way to catch fish. I love it. So for smaller crankbaits, I'm going to use a medium action fast. Now, when I get into the little bit heavier ones, I'll go medium to medium heavy, moderate. Again, it just allows you a little bit better castability on some of those bigger crankbaits. The big part with crankbaits is it's a treble hook bait, right? So when you think about setting the hook on a crankbait, the last thing you want to do is rip those treble hooks right out of their mouth, right? And that can happen a lot. You miss a lot of fish when you're crankbait fishing, but if you match up the crankbait to the right power and action rod, you're going to mitigate those risks and ultimately put more fish in your boat. I'm looking down here because I've got some notes. I just don't want to make sure I miss everything. You know, it's a lot to remember when you're trying to do one of these videos, so I'm kind of referring back to some of the specific points I wanted to make. So if you see me reading a little bit or looking down here, I'm just looking at some notes. You just need enough tip on a crankbait rod so that when they grab it, they can take it in, right? And using that fast to moderate, depending on the length of the rod or depending on the action of the rod, allows them to take that in just a little bit more, keeps you from yanking it out. Again, from a length perspective, I'm the same way. I really like that 7.1 to 7.6 as far as length goes. It's just a really good length to be able to throw them a long ways. Just a good overall length, right? So now when we talk about frog rods, flipping, stuff like that, my frog rod and my flipping rod are one and the same. I use it for both techniques. Personally, I use a 7-foot 9-inch to a 7.10 for both. And I'll tell you why here in a second. But as far as power and action, I go heavy and moderate fast. That for me provides the best hookups. I just think it's you can go fast if you want to, but I like the moderate fast. I just think it's a nice balance. If you're going up close, so flipping up close into, again, heavy cover, dock, stuff like that, anywhere from like a 6.10, you can even go 6.6 if you want to, but anywhere from a 6.10 to like a 7.3 is kind of that sweet spot for me. Those longer rods for shorter guys are a little bit tougher to use just because it's a hell of a lot out there. So if you're not comfortable with like a 7.9, 7.10, just step it down to 7.3, 7.6, give that a shot. But if you're up close, you know, accuracy is key. So doing that 6.10 to 7.3 is a little bit better for most people. What I was going to say about the length of the rod being so important, when you think about throwing frogs, flipping, stuff like that, being able to take up a lot of line in a hurry is key. And then having plenty of backbone when you do set that hook to drive that hook home. And that's why I like those longer rods, because you can take up a lot of line really, really quick. So just keep that in mind when you're picking out a good flipping or a frog rod. Those are some of the things I look at. From a jerkbait perspective, a lot of this for me depends on your height and your ability to not slap the boat with the rod when you're twitching, right? So I'm going to tell you anywhere from a 6.6 to a 7.2 is probably about the right range. And then a medium fast. So that tip is really crucial. And I was fishing a tournament with a buddy of mine who was throwing a jerkbait and just wasn't quite getting the strikes that we thought he should be getting, right? And it was because the action and the power on the rod didn't allow that jerkbait to do really what it was meant to do. And as soon as he started using my rod, he was like, okay, that's totally different. This is one of the few rods that I will not get rid of, even though, and sorry favorite, but until I find one of your rods that does what this rod does, I'm going to continue to use this as my jerkbait rod. I've got a 7.1 Denny Brauer Pro Series. medium. It's either extra fast or it's fast. It's actually a topwater rod. But this thing with a jerkbait is freaking deadly. Sorry guys, little break in the action there. We had some unruly children in the hallway playing football, yelling and screaming, so I had to shut the video off for a second so that I could clear up the audio. I can't remember where I left off, but that Denny Brower top router rod is absolutely one of my all-time favorites. I'm going to continue to use it until I find one to replace it. But, you know, like I said, the length is key, right? So the shorter you are, the shorter of a rod you're going to want to use, but you got to make sure it has the right power and action to impart the most lifelike action on the jerkbait when you're trying to retrieve it. So let's go to a spinning rod for a second. So depending on how you fish or what you fish, some people throw football style jigs for smallmouth and stuff like that on a bait cast, or some throwing on a spinning rod. I throw them on spinning rods 95% of the time. But you think about football jigs, shaky heads, Senkos, stuff like that. So from a length perspective, I'm anywhere from that 7 to 7.6. I like a longer rod. Again, I like being able to take that line up a little bit quicker. So I'll go on the farther side in that 7.6 range. And then you can go from a power and actions perspective, medium or medium heavy to moderate or fast. So you're going to want to try them both and kind of see what your preference is. If you go medium, I'd go fast action. If you go medium heavy, I'd probably go moderate. Just play around with it a little bit. But again, it just depends on your ideal preference, right? So it's really not overly complicated from a spinning rod perspective. We know it's a finesse technique, right? Depending on the weight of what you're throwing, bigger shaky head, stuff like that, you may go to a bait caster, and that's perfectly fine. You can do whatever you're comfortable with. The same rules apply, right, from a power and action standpoint. So just apply that to a spinning rod. I just prefer a spinning rod for those finesse tactics more than I prefer a bait caster. So let's go to swim bait, swim jigs. I'm not talking the big plastic giant swim baits. I'm talking soft plastic swim baits, anywhere from a 3.5 inch to 5 inch, you know, the boot tails, stuff like that. I like between a 7 and a 7.4, medium or medium heavy, fast. Again, it allows that fish to take it in a little bit. You get solid hook sets. And again, it's still a very finessey style, right? And I know a lot of guys that throw those soft plastic swim baits and swim jigs on a spinning rod. And that's perfectly fine. Again, just shift the power and weights to whatever rod you're particularly fishing, and it'll apply back and forth. So yeah, I think that just about covers it. And like I said, you can just play with this stuff and adapt it to your own personal preferences. Nothing I said here should be taken as the Bible, right? You kind of mix and match and tweak things to your own personal liking. But I wanted to put something out there for those folks that have some troubles trying to select a length, power, and action rod, and give them some pointers on what they can do to be a little bit more effective when they're out there on the water, right? It's very, very simple just to go to Walmart and grab any rod you want to off the shelf and just start hucking crankbaits. But, you know, 5 minutes later, you're wondering why every time you set the hook, you're yanking the hooks out of their mouth. It happens. It's not a myth. There are multiple rods out there for a reason, and we need to make sure that we're educated enough to select the one that we think is the right one for us, the right one for the technique. And you can Google this stuff all over the internet, and they're going to give you 1,000 different answers. I think, you know, real world, getting out there and playing with them will help you really narrow it down. But this is a really good starting point for you to start with. So, like I said, quick 5-minute video, nothing too earth-shattering in there, I am sure. But I hope that this helps you guys out trying to decide what what you're going to buy and help you be a little bit more effective out on the water. We've got another video in this series coming up. I don't know what I'm going to call it. Tip series. Probably not going to call it anything. Probably just going to keep putting out videos. I'm not too fancy about it. We're going to do live well care next. So we'll talk a little bit about what I do from an average day, some of the products I use, and just help keep your fish alive throughout the day of a full-on tournament. So again, I appreciate everybody tuning in. If you have not already, click the like and subscribe button. I think I put it right here somewhere. I don't really know how to do that on time, so there's no way that that is going to be in this bubble right now, but it'll be there or here. Click on it if you haven't already. Subscribe, like, comment, please. I can use all your support and video, or all your support and comments. Any ideas you have for future videos, I would love to hear. That's it, guys. Till next time, tight lines. Really appreciate you watching. We'll see ya.